March 1903. The Carpathian Mountains, western Romania. A silver mine pushes deeper into ancient rock than any operation before it. The miners whisper about cold spots in the lower galleries, about tools that vanish and reappear covered in something dark, about sounds that echo up from depths the company claims don't exist. Then the accidents begin. Men found drained, pale as mountain snow, with marks on their throats that can't be explained. This is the account of mining engineer Petru Moldovan, who descended 200 feet into the earth and discovered that some things were buried for a reason. If you want to hear more historical horror stories like this, subscribe now. My name is Petru Moldovan, and I studied at the Imperial School of Mines in Vienna before the century turned. I learned geology, engineering, metallurgy, everything a rational man needs to extract wealth from stone. I learned nothing about what sleeps in the deep places, waiting. The Breaza silver mine opened in 1898, 5 years before I arrived. The owner, a German industrialist named Kessler, had invested a fortune in equipment, modern pumps, electric lighting in the upper levels, steel tracks for the ore carts. The mine employed 43 men, mostly locals from the village of Breaza, with a few experienced miners brought in from Transylvania and Bohemia. I was hired in February 1903 to supervise the expansion of the lower galleries. The company wanted to push deeper. The silver veins were rich, and Kessler believed the best ore lay below our current depth of 150 feet. I arrived with blueprints and enthusiasm, believing this would make my reputation. The mine entrance sat on a mountain slope overlooking the valley, a timber-framed portal that breathed cold air even in summer. The main shaft descended vertically, with galleries branching off every 30 feet. We used a steam-powered cage to transport men and equipment, though many of the older miners still preferred the ladder system carved into the rock face. I remember my first descent clearly. The cage rattled and swayed as we dropped through darkness punctuated by the glow of work lanterns in the passing galleries. The temperature dropped steadily. At 150 feet, my breath turned visible despite the spring warmth above. The foreman, a Romanian named Vasile Cretu, stood beside me, his weathered face impassive. "How deep are we planning to go?" he asked. "The geological surveys suggest strong veins at 200 feet, possibly deeper." He was quiet for a moment as the cage groaned to a stop at the 150-foot gallery. My grandfather worked these mountains. He said there were old workings here, from before the Romans. Abandoned mines that went deep, very deep. "Old mines collapse," I said. "We're using modern engineering. Steel supports, proper ventilation. Nothing to worry about." Vasile gave me a look I would come to understand later. It's not collapse that worried them. The work began in early March. We blasted a new shaft, downward from the 150-foot level, using dynamite to fracture the rock, then clearing debris with picks and shovels. The silver content in the samples was excellent. Kessler was pleased with my reports. But the men were not pleased. By the second week, complaints started. Ion Petrescu, one of our best drillers, came to me after his shift. His face was grey with rock dust, but beneath it, I saw genuine unease. "Engineer Moldovan, something is wrong in the new shaft. The air feels thick, heavy." "We're improving ventilation," I assured him. "Another week and we'll have a proper air shaft connected." "It's not the ventilation, it's..." He struggled for words. "It feels watched. Several men have felt it. We hear sounds that don't match our work. Scraping, movement. But when we look, nothing is there." I dismissed this as nerves. Men working deep underground often developed anxieties. It was documented in mining journals. I made a note to improve the lighting in the lower sections. The accidents began on March 18th. Gheorghe Stănescu was working alone in the new shaft, drilling shot holes for the next blast. When we came to relieve him at shift change, we found him unconscious at the bottom of the shaft. his drill lying beside him. His lamp had gone out. We carried him to the surface. He was pale, abnormally so, with a weak pulse. The mine doctor, an older man named Baciu, examined him in the timber office we used for medical cases. "Exhaustion," Dr. Baciu announced. "Possibly exposure to bad air. He needs rest and feeding." But I saw the doctor's hands shake when he checked Georga's neck. I saw him lean close, examining something near the jugular before quickly buttoning the man's collar. "What did you see?" I asked, when the patient was carried out. Dr. Baciu looked at me for a long moment. "Bruising. 2 marks, puncture-like, but probably from a tool accident. These things happen underground." Georga recovered slowly. When I visited him a week later at his home in the village, he was sitting by the fire, still pale, wrapped in blankets despite the spring warmth. "What happened down there?" I asked. His eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "I was drilling when my lamp began to dim. Before I could refill it, I felt cold. So cold my breath froze in clouds. Then I heard something moving behind me in the darkness. Rats, I suggested, or settling rock. I've worked mines for 15 years. I know those sounds. This was different, deliberate." He paused. I turned, and in the last light from my lamp I saw a shape, tall, thin, pale as corpse flesh. It reached for me and then nothing. I woke up in the doctor's office. I wrote this off as oxygen deprivation causing hallucinations. But 3 days later, we had another incident. This time it was 2 men, working together in the 180-foot gallery we'd just opened. Stefan and Radu Popescu, brothers, experienced miners. They didn't return at shift change. We organized a search and found them collapsed near a branching tunnel we hadn't yet explored. Both were unconscious, deathly pale, with the same puncture marks on their throats. Dr. Baciu said nothing this time, just dressed the wounds and ordered them taken home. But Vasile pulled me aside after the evacuation. "You need to stop the deep work," he said quietly. "We're just reaching the richest veins." "There are stories about these mountains," Vasile interrupted. "About the Strigoi, the undead things that drink life from the living. My grandmother told them. Her grandmother before her. They say there were miners, centuries ago, who delved too deep and found something that should have stayed buried. When men started dying, drained of blood, they sealed the lower workings and left." "Folklore," I said, though my voice had lost conviction. "Then explain the marks. Explain why men working together, armed with picks and lamps, are found unconscious with wounds on their throats. Explain the cold that comes before each incident." I had no rational explanation, but I was a modern man, educated in Vienna. I didn't believe in vampires. I should have. On March 28th, we broke through into something old. We were blasting at the 200-foot level, the deepest point we'd reached. The explosion fractured more rock than expected, and when the dust cleared, we found not just broken stone, but an opening. A tunnel, hand-carved, leading into darkness beyond our lamplight. The crew refused to enter. I didn't force them. Instead, I descended with Vasile and 2 volunteers. Brave men or foolish ones, I'm not sure which. We carried electric torches, the latest German equipment, and armed ourselves with picks. The tunnel was ancient. The walls showed chisel marks from tools that predated modern steel. Someone had carved this passage centuries ago, possibly millennia. It sloped downward at a gentle angle, and the air that flowed from it was wrong. Not stale, but cold, with a smell like old churches and open graves. "We should seal this," Vasile said. "Whatever the old miners were running from, it's down there." But I saw silver ore in the walls, rich veins that gleamed in our torchlight. Kessler would double our budget for this. We could expand operations, hire more men, make this mine the most profitable in the Carpathians. 1 hour, I said. We explore for 1 hour, map what we find, then decide. We descended into the old working. The tunnel opened into a gallery that took my breath away. It was vast, carved from living rock, with pillars left to support the ceiling in patterns that suggested both engineering skill and something else. Ritual purpose, perhaps. The pillars were carved with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and angular shapes that hurt to look at for too long. And everywhere, silver. The walls gleamed with it, veins so thick you could cut them with a knife. This is impossible, I breathed. The old miners left this. Why? Because, Vasile's voice echoed strangely, they found something worse than poverty. That's when we saw the alcoves. They were carved into the gallery walls at regular intervals, each about the size of a man, and in each one lay bones, human skeletons, dozens of them, arranged carefully, hands crossed over their chests. Some wore remnants of clothing that crumbled to dust when our light touched them. A burial chamber, I said. The old miners buried their dead here. But Vasile was backing away, his face pale. Look at the bones. Look closely. I did. The skeletons were wrong. The ribs were cracked outward, as if something had broken out from inside. The skulls had holes in the temporal bones, not from trauma, but from something that had grown through the bone from within. And beneath the alcoves, scratched into the rock, were warnings in Latin and Old Romanian. Here sleep the Strigoi. Do not wake them. Do not disturb their rest. We're leaving, Vasile said. Now. I agreed. We started back toward our tunnel entrance, moving, quickly, but not running. Running in old mines is suicide. The floor is too uneven. That's when the lamps began to go out. Not all at once. First, the electric torch carried by one of the volunteers simply died, the filament gone dark despite fresh batteries. Then Vasile's carbide lamp guttered and failed. Then mine. We stood in absolute darkness, 200 feet underground, in a chamber full of bones. The cold came next. The temperature dropped so suddenly I felt ice forming on my beard. My breath turned to fog so thick I could barely see when someone managed to strike a match. In that brief, flickering light, I saw it. A figure stood between us and the exit tunnel. Tall, impossibly thin, with skin the color of old parchment stretched tight over bones that showed through like shadows. Its eyes reflected the matchlight, pale and dead and hungry. The match went out. We ran. I don't remember the details clearly. Just darkness, cold, the sound of our boots on stone and behind us following. With terrible patience, the scrape of something moving that didn't need light to see. One of the volunteers screamed. The sound cut off sharply. We didn't stop. Vasile was shouting prayers in Romanian, old prayers to St. Michael, to St. George, to anyone who might be listening in the dark. I just ran, hands outstretched, following the slight draft that meant ventilation, meant connection to the surface, meant life. We burst into our modern tunnel, into the glow of work lamps, left burning at the 200-foot level. Behind us, from the ancient gallery, came a sound. Not a scream, not a roar, just a dry whisper like wind through empty skulls. Then silence. We sealed the breakthrough that same day. I ordered the work crew to blast the tunnel entrance, collapsing it completely. Kessler sent telegrams demanding explanation for destroying access to such rich ore veins. I ignored them. The volunteer who'd stayed behind. We found him 3 days later when we cleared enough rubble to confirm the seal had held. His body was pale as snow, completely drained of blood, with those same puncture marks on his throat. But his face was twisted in an expression I'll never forget. Not fear, but ecstasy, as if whatever had taken him had offered something better than life. Dr. Baciu performed the examination. He was an old man, raised in these mountains, familiar with the stories. "The Strigoi can offer eternal life," he said quietly, "but at a price. They drink blood, yes, but they also drink will, memory, humanity. This man chose to stay. In his final moment, he chose what was offered. That's impossible. So is draining a man of blood in minutes. So is living undead in the earth for centuries. Yet, here we are." I submitted my resignation in April. Kessler refused to accept it, threatened legal action, promised bonuses. I walked away from it all. The salary, the career, the reputation I'd hoped to build. The Breaza mine continued operations until 1906, but never below 150 feet. The lower galleries were kept sealed, officially due to structural concerns. The men who worked there knew better. They heard sounds sometimes, scraping against the sealed tunnel, sounds that came in the deep night hours when only the watch crew was below. By 1907, the silver veins were exhausted, and the mine closed permanently. The entrance was sealed with concrete and steel, and the company records buried in archives that few people access. I moved to Bucharest, took a position teaching mining theory at the Technical University. I never went underground again, but I kept records. And over the years, I collected other stories. Mines abandoned suddenly across Romania, across the Carpathians, across Eastern Europe. Always the same pattern. Rich veins discovered at depth, workers drained of blood, ancient workings found that predated modern mining. The Strigoi were real, not in the way folklore described them, not undead peasants rising from improper graves. These were older, stranger things. People, perhaps, who had lived when the world was young, who had found a way to survive in the deep earth, sleeping for centuries, waking when disturbed. The old miners knew. That's why they sealed the workings and left the silver. They understood that some wealth costs too much. I'm 73 now, writing this in 1938, as another war begins to consume Europe. The Breaza mine has been forgotten, its location lost to updated maps and changing borders. The village is nearly empty. The young people moved to cities seeking work. But sometimes I wake at night, feeling that cold that has nothing to do with temperature, remembering the scrape of movement in absolute darkness, remembering eyes that reflected light they shouldn't be able to see. And I wonder how many sealed mines there are across these mountains, how many old workings that contain warnings in dead languages, how many times humanity has delved too deep and found things that were buried not by accident, but by terrified survivors who understood that some doors should never be opened. The Strigoi are patient. They've waited centuries before. They can wait centuries more. But the world keeps digging deeper. We need the metals, the minerals, the resources hidden in the earth. And eventually, inevitably, someone will break through another seal. I hope, when that happens, they're smarter than I was. I hope they listen to the warnings. I hope they run fast enough.